Perfect. Now, when folks attend this webinar, they have a wide variety of backgrounds in terms of their experience with ClickUp. So I won't be spending the entire time today on those beginner use cases, but I did just want to ground us in a few core concepts as we start to talk about some ready-made ClickUp templates that are really great for the event planning use case. So ClickUp is centered around a hierarchy system. And this is what enables you to break up work by things like departments within your business, by team, or by client. So in essence, we have 5 levels of the hierarchy. We have our workspace, which is the ultimate container for everything you're doing in ClickUp. We have spaces, which tend to be organized by department, sometimes by client. But in this case, to keep things simple, if you're just getting started, I do recommend creating just one space for all of your event planning. Inside of a space, we'll then have folders to bucket work by type or create a bucket for perhaps a very large project or a large event that you're managing. Inside of folders, we also have lists, which act as the tabs that break up a folder into more manageable pieces. So I'll walk you through the actual templates that we're seeing here in a moment, but just to get started, this is a folder template called Event Planning that you'll be able to add into your workspace to play around with it if you like after the webinar today. And we're using lists in this use case to break up things like activities, facilities, pre-event to-dos, and billing to-dos related to our event planning process. And then inside of each list, the last level of the hierarchy would be your tasks, which are visible in the middle of your screen here. So these are those concrete action items that you'll be ticking off as you plan and manage an event. And they incorporate things like assignees to hold people accountable for completing the task. You'll also be able to keep track of your start and due dates here. It's definitely a best practice, especially in this use case, to always make sure that you're adding a due date, if not a start and a due date to your tasks, so that you can visualize them in a calendar and keep track of everything that's going on in your schedule. These templates also include a variety of custom fields as well, which are very useful to help you keep track of any additional details that are important to your tasks. So for example, you might have a due date custom field for product delivery date if you're waiting on a vendor to ship something for an event. You could also have an email field to keep track of contact information for a vendor or a customer. And a few of the other examples that are included in this template would be things like a label custom field to keep track of what event a task pertains to, a drop-down field to organize tasks by venue or location, and maybe a budgetary field to indicate if you're going over or under your budget. Lastly, you'll see we have a progress percentage field here, which is just a great way to get a sense of how close you are to completing a task overall based on the completion of any subtasks it contains inside of it. All right, let's take a moment now and actually just walk through how you would create a space from scratch and enable features that are appropriate for the event planning use case. So if you are getting started with creating a space, you'll do that in the left sidebar here. So I'll just call mine events. You can add some colorful customization if you want, and choose if this should be a public space or a private one. Now, this is an important area to get right when you're creating a space for event planning. These are your statuses. So these are the steps that every task will move through on its way to completion. So when you're setting these up for event planning, you want to think about a workflow that is appropriate for all of the action items in your event planning process. We do keep it quite simple for you up front, so tasks are considered either to do or complete, but you can customize these in whatever way makes sense for you. So for example, You might have a status for in progress, waiting for client approval. How about just waiting for approval then? And you may want to incorporate things that are done statuses. So when a task is closed, that means it's complete, it's ready to disappear from view. But a done status could be quite useful in situations where maybe I'm pretty much done with my part on a task, but I'm blocked in some way from an external party, like a client or a vendor. So if I put a task in a done status, that will make sure that it is not counted as overdue for me, but it's not actually ready to be closed out because there's still one last step that needs to be concluded before it can be closed. Click apps are also very important to consider when you're designing your event planning workflows. These are features that can be turned on or off depending on the the features that are actually relevant to your use case. So we only want to turn on the features that you'll actually be using in your day-to-day event planning. Probably would not want to use things like sprints, and perhaps you wouldn't use something like time tracking either to log time against your tasks. Features that I would commonly see for this use case, though, would be, of course, the email feature. So that's the feature I'll be showcasing later today for sending an email directly from a ClickUp task, which is really useful to communicate with people outside of ClickUp. We'll also definitely want to turn on things like custom fields and multiple assignees if you're collaborating on tasks with other people and it's not just you working solo in ClickUp. Time estimates are very useful as well to indicate the planned duration for a task. So as you're planning an event, you can input its expected duration just to have that on hand when you're planning for who should handle a certain event. And also milestones can be really useful here. These are excellent for flagging tasks that are key within your project timeline. So for example, maybe you have a task for sending out final invitations for an event. You can flag that as a milestone and you will be able to easily filter for milestones and visualize them in the context of your other tasks. So you can always make sure that you're working to achieve those. And then finally, you may want to turn on rescheduling dependencies. Dependencies in ClickUp enable you to set a task as waiting on or blocking another so that everything can be done in a specific order. So if that's something that you like to do, which is definitely a valid use case for event planning, you may want to turn that feature on. And we'll skip over this view for now. It's not super relevant when you're just setting up the basic space. But once you have created your space, I did want to show you how you can start to access some of our templates that are excellent for event planning. And you can do that just by clicking on the plus sign next to your space, going to Template Center, and then browsing templates. So if you go into the community area, this is where you'll be able to browse templates that we at ClickUp have made for you to play around with various use cases. So what I would recommend doing is under the use case section, you can unselect all and then simply filter for event planning or events rather. Now you'll also notice that your templates can be filtered by type. So if you were really interested in exploring our templates for docs or for entire spaces that are relevant to events, you can always filter the templates by type. But there are 3 templates that I've dropped in for this particular webinar. So if you wanted to use any of these, you'd simply click on them and then choose to use the template. And you'll be able to drop them into your space directly from the template center. So we walked through a little bit of how the event planning folder looks and how we're using lists to kind of bucket tasks related to event planning by type. But what if you're spending most of your time throughout the year managing 3 or 4 or 5 really large events, or maybe up to 10? This might not be an optimal setup for you because you really need a larger scope. You need to be able to manage a larger scope of work related to a smaller number of events. If that's the case, you may want to check out the event management folder template. This one is set up a little bit differently in that it shows you how you could use a ClickUp list for each event that you're overseeing or planning. So this enables us to have tasks in each list that are related specifically to just one event. So you can really create a task for each of the to-dos, and you'll also notice that I have utilized the milestone feature here as well. This task has been flagged as a milestone, so it has this little diamond icon next to it. Booking a venue is obviously a key point in the event planning process. So if you ever want to flag something as a milestone, it's as simple as going into the settings for your task, and you can turn that on so that it's clearly indicated in your view. A couple of the other views that are tied to these templates that you may want to explore. First, we have our calendar view. So the calendar view is a great way to get a high-level overview of all of your event planning tasks by date. As long as you're using the start and due date features, a task will appear in the calendar view. And you'll also notice that holidays will show up in here as well. So you'll be able to take that into account in your scheduling process. Now, you don't have to view an entire month on the calendar. If you wanted to zoom in a little bit and just see perhaps a week or a daily view, you can do that here. And any unscheduled or overdue tasks will also appear in the sidebar here. So you can simply drag and drop those onto the calendar and you can move them around to reschedule them a little bit. I wanted to show you one other template that is available to you in the template center, which is for the events planning doc. Docs in ClickUp are what we call page views. These are incredibly useful to keep track of things like a knowledge base, a project plan, design concepts that you want to document. In this case, we have a doc for event planning, and you'll see it includes different pages for setup details, an invitation list, or a vendor list. If you're someone that really loves to use tools like spreadsheets or even Google Docs at this point, this ClickUp doc would be a really great place to start to get a very simple overview of how you could manage a vendor contact list. We have a feature in here called slash commands, which will enable you to add all of this rich editing like colorful bold font, these boxed text items. So by simply hitting the slash key within a doc, you'll open up this rich editing menu where you can start to add in things like, headers. Every time you get a new vendor contact, you could come in here and just have this as your central repository where you can store all of this information. I am getting a little bit of feedback that the screen is a little bit small. I've zoomed in a little bit here, so hopefully that's going to improve things. But give me a shout from anyone on the coaching side if it's still not super visible for people, please. All right. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about ways that you can manage expenditures and payments due with our formula fields. So formula fields are a way to create simple calculations between any numeric fields in ClickUp. So that could be things like a custom money field. It could also be time tracking and time estimates if you budget hours when you're planning an event for a client. But we do have a nice example of that included in the event planning folder template. So if you are using this, you'll be able to see that the template includes a list view called budget. And in here, we can see columns for amount spent per task. We can also see what the budget was. And then here we have a formula field. So very simple way that you could sum up budget minus spent and then see the remaining amount to spend for each task. If you want to add your own formula fields for any numeric fields that you've created on your own, it's as simple as clicking on this plus sign in list view and going down to formula. And once you add in that column, you'll be able to come in here and choose the fields that you'd like to calculate with the formula. So maybe it would be, I'd actually want to see my time estimated here. So what was my planned duration for all of these tasks minus what I've actually tracked on them. And we'll be able to calculate that to see what's the remaining amount of time that I have to work on these tasks until I've kind of hit my planned limit. This budgetary status field is also interesting because you do have the ability to group a view by the custom field value. So if you like to view tasks kind of by their custom field value, you'll notice that I have this option enabled so that all of the tasks fall under their budget field values like this. Finally, I wanted to mention the calculated column feature in list view. So if you're using numeric fields like the money field here, under the bottom of each group in list view, you'll be able to calculate those values to find their sum, average, or range. So one thing that I could do is if I was looking at my whole event planning folder and I wanted to get a sense of the amount spent for all of my tasks in this folder, I could click to sort the entire column by the spent value here. And then at the bottom, you'll see that I have the ability to calculate to find the entire sum of everything that I've spent alongside the entire amount that I have budgeted, so I can get a sense of how much I have left. Many of you might be wondering, can I vertically calculate a formula fields? You cannot quite yet. That is something we're going to be adding, but just keep in mind that the formula fields can presently only be calculated horizontally. I can't calculate the whole column like I can for a normal money field. All right. Let's chat a little bit about dashboard reporting. So dashboards are an option located in the left sidebar, and this is an excellent place to get a high level overview of your event management process. So you can report on things like overall amount spent or budgeted in a different way. You can also create portfolio views of larger events to get roll-up information on planning progress, on statuses, lots of information like that. So anyone can create a dashboard in the dashboard area. Just keep in mind that they will be private to yourself by default, but by going into the sharing menu for a dashboard, you can always share them with another teammate if you want to collaborate with them in the dashboard. You can also invite a guest if you wanted to invite someone like a client to see your dashboard. So this dashboard is just called event management. And inside of this dashboard, I have added various widgets to see the tasks, the task information in different ways. So I'll walk you through the widgets that I've created here, but all of our widgets are categorized by type. And I'll give you a sense of some of the ones that are most user-friendly for event management. The custom widget area is a really great place to start. It allows you to visually group data in whatever way is most pleasing to you. So for example, maybe I would like to create a pie chart to get a sense of all of my tasks grouped by their venue or location. So events by location for 2021. Anytime you create a widget in the dashboard area, you will be able to choose where you want to pull data from. So you don't have to pull data from everywhere here. You can just come in and choose the specific spaces, folders, or lists that you'd like to be included in your results. In the pie chart area, I'm going to group by a drop-down field because as we saw a little bit earlier, we have that drop-down field for location. So I can go in there and choose that. And then I'll be able to see a pie chart of all of my tasks grouped by location. Now, sometimes these widgets take a little bit of time to load, so I'm just going to move on to showcase a couple of the other widgets in the meantime. The chat widget is a really great one to communicate with anyone that you've shared the dashboard with. So just like you can in a ClickUp task comment thread, I can come in here and @mention someone to trigger a notification for them that I need their attention in this chat. And then you'll see that I can actually get their replies here. They can add a reaction to show me that they've seen my comment. And one of my favorite things about ClickUp is that you actually have the ability to mention a specific task. So by hitting the @ key on my keyboard twice, I can come in here and find a task that I want to follow up on, maybe for a specific event. And I will be able to link to that so that my colleague can actually open it up from the chat. The embed widget is also really useful to embed literally anything into your dashboard, from an external Google Calendar that you need to see with all of your event schedule. In this case, I have embedded a link to a ClickUp map view where I can see plotted all of the events that I have planned. So I can actually interact with this directly from the dashboard area. This will show me what tasks I have related to the little map plot points. So I can always check in exactly on what events are happening and where via this map view. The calculation widget is what you see over here on the right. So this is another great way to sum up any numeric values you have in ClickUp. So in this case, I've pulled in that budget money custom field I was showing you earlier from the event planning folder to show the sum. So I can see the cumulative amount budgeted. And then I have a separate widget summing up all of the amount spent field values so I can compare those. Finally, the last widget that I wanted to showcase for you for now would be the portfolio widget. So the portfolio widget is an excellent way to get a high-level roll-up of all of the values within a list or a folder. So in this case, if we go into the settings, you'll see that in my portfolio view, I've come in and pulled in those 3 lists from the event management folder. So since I'm spending, in this use case, most of my time just managing these 3 big events, I've pulled in the lists into my portfolio, and I can visualize things like progress percentage. So how close are we to completing the tasks here? What are the actual statuses of tasks in each list? What's my planned start and end date for planning this event? And then things like the owner of planning the event, as well as any milestone tasks that I've included for this event. You'll also notice that we have a color field here. This is really handy if you ever want to indicate a status for an entire list. You can also do this for a folder in ClickUp. So I'll show you now how you can actually apply these colors to something like an event list. You can do this just by going into the list info section for a list. And at the top, right here under this little dot is where I can add various colors and labels to indicate if this is on track, if it's falling behind, and you can edit these values to customize them to your needs. So if you're using lists to manage different events, I highly recommend playing around with that feature because it makes it really easy to get a sense of what's going on for the entire list in the portfolio widget. All right. So the last thing that we wanted to touch on here would be the pie chart. This is loaded now, so you can see this just groups my tasks by that location custom field. So I can see progress percent, or excuse me, I can see the tasks that have been scheduled for each event in here. Hopefully that gives you a sense of some different widgets that you may want to play around with for the event planning use case. I will also recommend that if you're someone that likes to use time estimates for duration of tasks or time tracking, check out the time tracking area as well, where you can create things like timesheets or get a roll up of all of the time you've estimated for your events in tasks via the time estimated widget. Earlier, I spoke a little bit about how you can create a contact center for people like vendors or sponsors within a ClickUp doc. But there's another way that you can do this, which is via ClickUp tasks. So we do have another template called company directory that, while it's not perfectly aligned to this use case, I think is a great starting point for creating something like a vendor contact list. So again, this is something that you could add into your workspace as well via the template center. Just search for the company directory template. But it does include some very useful custom fields for things like email contact, phone information, birthday fields for text to check in with an important customer, or any important notes you might need to know about that vendor or customer. You'll also be able to input things like working hours, which I know has been particularly helpful when working with vendors in various time zones, just so you can know what's the best time to schedule a meeting with them or contact them. And not only is this great for just in a simple data repository sense, but don't forget that tasks are highly interactive as well. So you can click to come in here, and if you would like, you can even invite your vendor as a guest to chat with them within a task. So the guest feature is an excellent way to loop in people like a contractor or a customer or a vendor who really only need to have minimal contact with you in ClickUp, and they only need to see bits and pieces of the whole picture. But by going into a tasks settings area and checking out sharing and permissions, you will see the option to start inviting people as a guest. So when you invite a guest, maybe you invite a vendor, you can choose to give them a certain level of permissions, maybe not full access, but maybe just comment access. And that way you could actually start to communicate with them directly in the task comment thread here, and they can start to respond to you and have a conversation in the task. The last thing that I wanted to make sure to touch on before I open this up for Q&A would be email in ClickUp. Email in ClickUp is an integration. So as long as you have admin access to your ClickUp workspace, you will be able to enable this by going into the integration settings area and then finding email. Now, the great thing about this is you can actually link any email account to ClickUp to send emails from it. It doesn't have to be the email address associated with your ClickUp account necessarily. So you'll be asked to authenticate your address here via Google or Microsoft, whatever application you're using. And you'll also be able to customize who has the ability to send from that account. For professional purposes, you can also create a custom signature that will be included when you send an email out from a task. So that can either be, simple raw text, or if you use HTML, like I've done here, you can customize it like so. My favorite thing about this feature probably is the ability to create message templates. So for those repeat messages that you may send to, confirm registration for an event or confirm that tickets have been sent out, you can create these templated replies that you can simply plug in when you're sending an email out from a task. So these can include the subject line that should pop in when you send the email. You'll fill in your content, and then you can also choose who in ClickUp should be able to utilize that template. So let me show you quickly how this would work when you're actually wanting to send an email from a task. Before I do that, though, I'll just kind of frame the use case a little bit here. So one way we could use this would be in a situation where maybe we're contacting a vendor. If I didn't want to invite my vendor as a guest, I would be able to use this email and ClickUp feature to communicate with them from the task comment area. So rather than writing just a normal comment, I would click the email button here, and I can just plug in their address like so. And I can either start an email from scratch here, or I can click to plug in an email template. So you'll see in this template, I've included my subject line. I have the body of the email here. And then I can also plug in my signature. So that's all included in the email. And when I send this off, the recipient is not going to know that I actually sent this from a ClickUp task. It's going to go through just like a normal email. It's going to be visible when I go into my Gmail account later, but they will be able to respond to me. And when they respond, it will actually pop up in my email thread there. Looks like we encountered a little fun bug on that, but that does happen. But the great thing is that you will be able to communicate with someone outside of ClickUp via that feature, and it will be a seamless experience for them. They won't even need to log into ClickUp themselves to communicate with you. Bonus feature that you may want to consider in conjunction with email and ClickUp is automation. So we do have an automation feature, which is a way that you can set up triggers and actions to streamline your workflow and take out some of the manual day-to-day work that you typically have to do without this. So if you're just getting started with automation, you can start with some of the simple customizable options. For example, when a status changes to on leave, maybe I would want to change the assignee to a different person so that the previous assignee can be covered while they're out. Or perhaps I would add a comment for myself or for a teammate to say, hey, this person is out. can you please cover the task? So this is a great place to get started with automation, but under the integration section of the automation area, you'll see an email section. And in here, you can really dig into that email and ClickUp feature so that when something happens, an email will automatically be sent out. For example, maybe when the due date arrives for your event, you would want to send an automatic email out thanking people for attending so that they'll get that when they return from the event. So we can see here, this is the trigger when the due date arrives, and then this is the action that will occur when that trigger hits. Now we can fill this out manually to say we want to send it out to X people or X addresses upon this trigger, but you can also utilize those message templates in the automation so that something will be sent out in that message automatically when the trigger hits. We use this feature a lot in relation to things like technical issue reports. So we'll have a task for a bug that a customer reports to us. And when the bug is set to a complete status, we'll automatically email them to let them know that it's been resolved. So this feature can really speed up your workflow quite a bit. And I definitely recommend checking it out for easing communication with customers and vendors. All right, so that's just about it for me in terms of the content that I had prepared today, but I'm now going to open up the Q&A tab and take a look at any of the questions that may be remaining. So if you have any questions for me regarding event planning, please do send those in via the Q&A rather than the chat, and I will take a look at those. I see a question from Kamal. Please explain what you mean, and best if you show how to get different reports out of the various tasks and vendor and employee responsibilities. I need overall printouts and individual printouts for each person. Pam responded to say, I would love to know this too, as my huge corporate client can't use ClickUp, so we'd have to do event management internally with my team and then export info or a link to certain views to the client, but the client won't be in ClickUp. Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I will mention is that at the moment, you do have the ability to export select widgets in a dashboard. So for example, I think the pie chart would be exportable perhaps, but we do not currently have the option to export or print out an entire dashboard to share it with someone outside of ClickUp. That being said, if you don't want to invite someone as a guest so that they can see the dashboard, we have some other exporting functionality that you may want to check out. So let's say, for example, we wanted to get a sense of, you know, in our company directory scenario, we want to get a sense of the tasks grouped by department, so we can get a sense of the stakeholders for each type of department. You have the option to export this in the settings area. So you can send this as a CSV or an Excel file and choose what types of columns you want to be included in the export. So either all of the visible columns here, or if you also wanted to include columns that are hidden from view, you get to choose that when you export, and you'd be able to deliver that to an outside party. Another thing you can do though is share a public link to a view in ClickUp. And this works in the list view, but it could also be in a calendar view, it could be in a board view, whatever way those outside stakeholders like to view their work. You can then go into the share button and you'll be able to turn on public sharing. And this will create a public read-only view for anyone with the link. You'll also be able to choose if someone should or should not be able to open up tasks in this link. So if you allow opening of tasks, you can choose to hide certain fields. For example, a lot of people wouldn't want to share comments in an external link, or maybe custom field values. So to show you what this would look like, I can copy the link and I can open this up in a new tab. The great thing about this is that it updates dynamically as you make changes. So your client would be able to come in here anytime and see a live board view or a live calendar or list view of what you're working on, and they won't even need to be a member of your ClickUp workspace. Hopefully that gives a bit of clarity on the sharing information, but happy to answer additional questions about that. Leanne asks, suggestions for best way to build an entire event planning timeline using lists from concept to execution. So a great way to get started with that would be with the template. But if you want to start from scratch, I always recommend starting with a standalone list to keep things really, really simple. You can always scale this up a level of the hierarchy later. But what I would start from a brainstorming perspective would be by adding a new list. And I can call this event planning process. And then from there, I would start to add tasks into my list for the standard to-dos from concept to execution that I'd need to complete when planning an event timeline. So maybe that would be determine key internal and external stakeholders, define budget, schedule conceptual discussion meeting. It can be these kind of simple line items. And if there are to-dos within those, you can use the subtask feature to break things up into smaller pieces. So for budget, maybe it would be for food and entertainment. The whole point of this is to develop some kind of template that you can use as a starting point when creating when planning future events. Two other features that I would definitely utilize when you're going through this would be assignees and due dates. So if you're working with a team and there are always certain people that are involved in each action item, I would go ahead and actually assign these out to those people in my kind of rough template here. And then I would also put in due dates as much as possible. So if you know that your standard event planning process takes 60 days, when you're building this out, work through what a ideal start and end date would be for the whole process. So let's say I know that my first task here for determining stakeholders should take me a week. So I'll start on July 1st as an example and end on the 8th. And then I know the budgetary information, that's going to take me another week. So I can come in here and say, I'm going to start that on the 9th and end on the 16th. And by the end of this, all of your tasks from concept to completion will have your dates. Once you've completed that, you can start playing around with different types of views. So for example, something like a calendar or a Gantt view would be really great here to create a timeline based on those dates you've put into your tasks. So once I've added in that view, I will be able to see tasks arranged by date. So I can see them scheduled out here, and my unscheduled stuff is still in the sidebar over here. So I can actually drag and drop that onto my Gantt chart if I did want to schedule it out. This is a great place too, where you can play around with dependencies to make things wait or block one another. So if I hover over a task in the Gantt chart, and I click on this little dot, I will be able to drag and drop that to connect it to another action item, so that I know I have to determine the stakeholder information before I can start defining the budget stuff. So I would recommend inputting your dependencies if you like to use the Gantt view. And then the last thing I'd recommend is, once you've come up with that kind of basic framework for your event planning process, go into your list settings and save this as a template, so that in the future, when you're planning in a new event, you'll have that template available that you can just plug in and reuse it for future events. Leanne, oh, we got that one. Jennifer asks, can you please explain the field section from the email automation? Could we set up email automation to include the info entered into a ClickUp form, so a set group always gets an email from the form info for each time the form is completed, apart from the task that is created from the form completion? Yeah, that is something that you are able to do. So let's just take a step back really quickly and kind of talk about the form view. Forms are really, really great for streamlining any sort of information intake process. So for example, we have this foods conference list. I could create a form in here for event registration for anyone that is interested in attending this event. And anytime this event is submitted, it's going to create a new task in ClickUp for me to take action on. So for example, if I had a custom field in here for email address, I would be able to drag and drop that onto the form so that anyone can fill in their email address here to register for my event. And you can put in any other fields that you would want them to fill out. But once you've created the form to your liking, you would be able to click the share button, and you can either send people a direct link to it, or you can embed the form on something like your personal website for people to click and register. So just to show you what this looks like from the client perspective or from the submitter's perspective, let's say I come in here and my email is Sophia at ClickUp. Once I submit that, it's going to tell me that the form submission went through. And I will be able to see that as a new task created in the foods conference list. So now getting back to the field automation that you asked about, ClickUp will allow me, when I'm setting up automation with email and ClickUp, to automatically detect field values when I'm sending out an email based on a certain trigger. So let's say we're going to set up some automation for the foods conference list to do something when someone submits a new form. So I can go into automation, and under the email section, maybe I'd want to send it when the task is created. So when a task is created, I'm going to send an email out, and I'm going to choose that email custom field value. So as long as someone, when they're submitting the form, fills in their email, it's automatically going to go to that specific address. There are some other things that I can include as well. So like, for example, if you wanted to put the due date in there for the event due date, or the date created when they put in their request, you can just include those task fields in the subject or in the body of the email. So that's how that works. And that would be a great way to make sure that your email always goes to a specific address that the form submitter indicated in the form. Derek asks, any other users that are using ClickUp to plan multiple events in a facility, possibly thousands per year? Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that use case before. A question like that again comes back to our hierarchy structure. So um, when you're thinking about how should I use spaces, folders, or lists for the way that I specifically manage event planning, think about how you like to visualize things from the top down. So if rather than looking at things from the perspective of, specific events, so since it sounds like you have thousands per year, you're probably not spending hours a day looking at one particular event. So maybe instead you would want to consider creating a space oriented around a facility. And then within that, you could use this as a place to bucket your events quarterly. If you know that you do, 200 events every quarter, perhaps you could utilize folders to have your events bucketed quarterly. But to me, it sounds like if you're spending all of your time on thousands of different events in a facility, um, it would be worth playing around with the idea of having a task per event. Because when I've worked in past situations with customers, doing thousands of events per year, they might have a repeatable structure that you could use something like a task template, where you have all of the to-dos for that event laid out as subtasks, and then you can just reuse that template for each event that you manage. But I'd play around with the idea of having your space level be the overall facility. All right. Um, I will just take two more questions because we have a few more minutes. Kamal asks, I also need to print reports and place them on the war room wall. Wow, I would love to see that war room wall. I'm getting a vision of Homeland or something with all of the red yarn going across the wall. I'm sure it's a very interesting visualization. But the only other way aside from the exporting functionality I showcased you earlier would be simply using Command P. That's going to open up the printing functionality, and you can use that to print an entire list of tasks, a board, a calendar. So you can download it as a PDF or print it, but those are the solutions we have for that at this time. I'll leave it open in case there's any other questions. Jennifer, you're welcome. I'm glad that was a helpful answer. But I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend. I hope this was helpful in getting you started with thinking about event planning and ClickUp. I did want to stress that we do have an awesome help center as well. So if you'd like to rewatch the recording of this later or share it with others, we'll be posting that on our webinars page, which you can access via the help center within about 24 hours. You can also check out our available templates, as well as our doc and video resources if you're looking for some, shorter 5 to 10-minute resources around event planning. And then we have a world-class support team, which you can contact via chat. So highly recommend giving them a quick chat if you have any questions about what we discussed today. But again, thank you. It looks like we don't have any other questions popping up in Q&A at the moment. So hope you all have a great day or evening wherever you are. And thank you again for your time.